So, I made a video last year talking about Motorsport Games' acquisition of Studio 397 and rFactor 2, and how I thought that that could be a good thing. Oh, what a difference 8 months can make. Almost everything I said in that video, I regret at this point. When I said it, I genuinely thought it to be true, but Motorsport Games released their first ever video game that they built in-house from scratch last October, and to say it was bad would probably be an understatement. People thought that Heat Evolution was bad, but NASCAR 21 blows it out of the water in terms of negative reviews on Steam. Heat Evolution has only 135 reviews, and that's 46.08% of all-time reviews. NASCAR 21 has an impressive 314 negative reviews, 77.34%. I personally had to mod the game just to get my Thrustmaster T300 and TLCM pedals to work with the game, and it's not even like I'm using some random wheel either. But the point of this video is Motorsport Games released a Q&A video on the future development of the series to try and alleviate concerns. For me personally, it didn't do that at all. But I want to discuss some of the things said in that video, and the link to the full video will be in the description. And so, I actually plan to do a My Thoughts video on the game, similar to ones I've done for other games, but because the game was so broken, and by the time I got around to getting the game in a, and dare I say, somewhat playable state, it was pretty late after the game came out for it really to have much use to people, plus I just wasn't in the mood to give the game more publicity. Even negative publicity. So, I ended up scrapping the idea. But let's take a look at the video. First off, Dmitry Kozko, CEO for Motorsport Games, said, quote, "We set out to create really great NASCAR gaming experiences. Well, you failed. And you failed big time." He also said, quote, "Just like many other innovations in the marketplace, when they're launched, they don't always go as smooth." End quote. Okay, so that's not a terrible statement, but most products that get put out in the market are complete products. This one wasn't, and if they thought it was, then they're delusional. Only in the video game industry can you sell an incomplete product to a consumer. You don't go to the store and buy half a shirt or half a box of cereal. Or even looking at a very digital industry like the video game industry, you don't go and buy half a movie with the promise of them making the other half later. Even looking at computer programs, which has become more of a service industry with constant updates. Most of the time, if the program costs money, they offer usually some sort of a free trial. And if it's incomplete, people generally won't buy it. Now, there's obviously exceptions to the rule, but that's generally how it works. Kozko also further said, quote, "We want to get better at being more transparent and more authentic on our intentions." End quote. Well, they couldn't do much worse. And I was actually going to bring this up in my thoughts video. There was confusion over whether the game had the initial day one patch before it was officially released. And Jalopnik, a media outlet writing a story on it, reached out to Motorsport Games asking for clarification if it was in the game, and they couldn't have been more vague and deflected the question, even if they tried. They said, quote, "We are actively working on resolving the issues that have been reported by the community thus far. We hope to have our next patch live very soon with additional fixes to follow," end quote. That doesn't answer the question now, does it? And this to a media outlet, again, writing a story. I myself called them out on Twitter for a lack of wheel support when the game first launched, and this is actually still an issue to this day. And they couldn't even be bothered to reply with a simple link to report the issues. Now, I knew of the link, that's not the point. They didn't know that I knew the link. This is why you have a social media team. As someone with a marketing degree and having run multiple Twitter accounts and led a social media marketing campaign, this is honestly just painful to see. So let's now switch to the HUD, and specifically the virtual HUD mirror. Director of Design Paul Coleman said, quote, "So we had originally planned NASCAR 21 to be a next-gen only release, but as we were developing the game, we saw that there weren't enough of the next-gen consoles being sold in, and we recognized that the majority of our community were going to be remaining on the previous generation of consoles. So we took the quite difficult decision to actually scale the game back to run on these earlier generation machines, and that's why we had to make this compromise. You'll see that players on PC do have the rear view mirror, and I'm hopeful that with our next gen upgrade that's coming later this year, we may be able to reintroduce mirrors for console players," end quote. Okay, so that's nice that they're thinking about their player base and ensuring it can run on the platforms they're releasing it on. So they're taking a look at their target market and looking at their needs. Good job, but two issues here. One, as a PC player, I do not have any mirror options, so that's a lot. Unless he's talking about the one camera angle where you get the in-car mirror, which isn't really a usable camera because it's too far zoomed out, very much like NASCAR Heat. Then, second, there's a game out there called Assetto Corsa Competizione, which runs on the very same graphics engine as NASCAR 21, and Kunos found a way to implement mirrors, and this game is also available on the previous generation of consoles. And that game, to me, just looks graphically better and will be more of a sim than NASCAR 21 could ever hope to be. So further on the HUD, fuel and tire wear indicators. Paul Coleman said, quote, "The approach we wanted to take was one of authenticity. I feel that so many games out there today are essentially a play by numbers. You see all the information in the HUD, and you're able to react to it in a way that's not that authentic to how the drivers get to drive these cars in the real world. In the real world, there's no tire wear indicator. Essentially, the driver's feeling the tires going off in their hands. And when it comes to fuel, really all you get is a fuel pressure warning when you have to switch over to your reserve tank. There's no full fuel gauge showing the tank draining. So this is something that the driver works with the crew chief to strategize around. And they make choices as the race goes on. Now, after all, we are making a simulated experience. It is something I think we can do a better job of informing the player about. But we need to be careful about how much of this information we produce on screen versus the experience we're trying to deliver. So we want to strike a good balance between authenticity and information to the player in the future." End quote. Okay, so this is just ridiculous. Has anyone told them that they're making a video game and not building a real race car? He mentioned the fuel pressure warning that drivers get in real life. Okay, that's more than we get in the game, even now, I believe. The only thing that we get is the spotter telling us that we're low on fuel, and that's not even accurate. Some people may want to go full-on hardcore mode. Cool, good for them. But this brings me back to my initial video I made on Motorsport Games, where I mentioned how the same Paul Coleman said that they wanted their games to appeal to everyone and be as wide-reaching as possible. But hey, let's now hide important information for the sake of realism. Additionally, by saying that it's not included because it's not realistic is absolute garbage. Let's look at some other things that are in the game that aren't realistic. Lap countdowns. Drivers don't always know what lap they're on. They have to ask the spotter. The running order with the gap delta. Drivers don't know that. That's something that has to be communicated to the driver. Speed in miles per hour. Drivers only get a tachometer showing their RPMs. Passing indicators. Those aren't real. Drivers have to rely on their spotter to communicate where the cars are. And that's just the HUD. Not all the camera angles are real. Driving in chase camera isn't real, but that's in the game. Assists aren't real, so why are those in the game? Oh yes, to accommodate everyone, but we won't give important information to people to accommodate everyone. And believe me, we're going to make a full round trip back to assists, believe me. I'd say drivers don't have a track map, but that's not true. Most drivers at road courses do have track maps in the car, but Motorsport Games couldn't even be bothered to give us that for the sake of realism. But hey, at least they eventually added brake marker boards for the sake of realism. And as for feeling the tires going away on a wheel, the force feedback does absolutely nothing. So there goes that option. I've played a lot of racing games, sim, arcade, and even the simcades. And all of these games that have fuel and tire wear gives you some sort of HUD identifier for these things. Now, my question is, are they going to actually remove these features from rFactor 2 for the sake of realism? Because that'd suck. And on the topic of something else that's not real that's in the game, and that would be motion blur. If you've seen some of my other videos, I've commented on how much I hate motion blur. Motion blur is not real. That's not how your eyes work. But they included it in the game and refused to give us an option to turn it off. Coleman said, quote, "It's actually really complicated. So we could add a toggle for motion blur, but the effect that is actually seen in game is a combination of a number of factors. Motion blur is included in that, but there's a number of other post-processing effects at play. There's anti-aliasing and a frame rendering, and an updating algorithm. So all these things combine together to give the effect that you're seeing. So adding that toggle, which is feasible, may not actually alleviate your concerns. So what we're going to look at is how we can perhaps combine all these settings together, but it's something we'll only be able to do in the future," end quote. So again, this is kind of like the ACC mirror thing I said earlier. There's plenty of other games out there that can figure this out. It shouldn't be that hard. One of those is ACC. Let's take a look at car handling now. Coleman said, quote, "I think with all the assists off, the car is pretty challenging to drive. This is due to the more authentic physics and tire model we're using for ignition. I do agree that we could do a better job of getting players better feedback. So when they're losing control, they can get the information they need to help them react better. I think for now, our focus is turning towards the next gen car, and we'll be looking to improve the car stability as we work on the new physics for that vehicle. But for now, if you're struggling, turn some of the assists on. We worked really hard to get these assists helping players keep control of the car, and I'd encourage you to do that," end quote. So wait a minute. We're supposed to use unrealistic assists to help us control the car in a realistic, authentic experience. This coming from the same person that defended the lack of displayed information as authentic and shoving a realistic experience at players. But for me, the car handling and feedback just completely misses the mark. They don't even feel in the same universe as rFactor 2. And they supposedly used rFactor physics. Right. I'm not complaining about my inability to drive the car, because I struggle with the same issue in rFactor 2 as well. But it's the complete lack of understanding of what the car is doing. Here's the difference. Here's an example. So let's say I spend an hour hot lapping in rFactor 2. Let's say I spin maybe 50 times. It doesn't really matter. Let's just say a lot. In rFactor, I know exactly what I did wrong every time, and I can learn from it. I could spend 5 minutes playing ignition, and I'll spin like 10, 15 times and not have a clue what the problem is. It honestly feels like wheel spin, but it's not communicated through the wheel, and it comes at points coming out of corners that I genuinely considered to be too late to be getting that much wheel spin. But on the flip side of that, I can't seem to lock up the brakes or at least do it bad enough to wreck me, even if I try. Basically, what I'm trying to say is that rFactor 2 does an amazing job at giving drivers the feel of driving at the limit. NASCAR 21 Ignition doesn't even give you enough information to tell you if you're in the same ballpark of driving the car on the limit. And the 2018 cars in rFactor have less downforce than the ones in Ignition and thus should be harder to drive, but it's actually the opposite. Okay, now unrelated to the NASCAR Q&A, so on a different but more positive note, Studio 397 has announced multiple new content additions for rFactor 2. There is 3 new cars and a track, all coming February 7th as paid DLC. The cars are the BMW M4 GT3, the Liger JS P320 LMP3, and the IndyCar Dallara DW12 IR18. The new track is the Daytona International Speedway. The IndyCar and Daytona are probably the product of the licenses that Motorsport Games has acquired from NASCAR and IndyCar. This is something that I had previously discussed as something that I was hopeful for with the additional licenses that Motorsport Games has, that they would be able to bring more quality content to rFactor 2, especially ovals. Daytona is now only the second official oval in the game from Studio 397, with Indianapolis being the other. There are several older oval ripoffs from ISI available via the Steam Workshop. However, these are not laser scanned or licensed and are just quite old. Daytona is laser scanned and will feature the oval and the endurance road course. It doesn't appear that they will include the stock car version of the road course that NASCAR used with the additional chicane on the exit of turn 4 of the oval, which is a bit disappointing with the stock cars that Studio 397 has, which are fantastic. rFactor 2 has the Dallara DW12 IndyCar from 2014. The IR18 is built off the same Dallara DW12 chassis, but with updated aero kits. Studio 397 did confirm in an rFactor 2 developer blog post that most of the licenses that Motorsport Games has are on a per game basis and are not exclusive to specific titles and series. So the hope is for more quality, diverse content going forward. With the stock cars and now IndyCar, I think it should be a major priority for Studio 397 to focus on bringing more ovals into the game and working on the quality of the oval racing. However, that being said though, oval racing can be a very niche kind of racing, with it only being prevalent in North America. These are some great additions for rFactor 2, and I'm super excited for them. Let me know in the comments if you'd like to see a video of me showcasing off these new additions after they release next week. Also, drop a comment with what new content you'd like to see from Studio 397. I still have so many concerns after watching this Q&A. I just don't see 2022 being the year of quality games from Motorsport Games. With NASCAR and now British Touring Car Championship game coming out, it's just frustrating how big Motorsport Games got with no actual products being put out to market. They had the NASCAR license until 2029. And they got the IndyCar game coming next year. Honestly, it's just frustrating to be a racing game fan at this point. So, now you've heard from me, and now I want to hear from you. What are your thoughts on Motorsport Games and the NASCAR series going forward? Let me know what you think down in the comments. Thanks for watching, and until next time, so long everybody.